Ahojte moji milí štvrtáci, ja vás vítam na dnešnej hodine. Je to posledná hodina pred odovzdaním z vášho zadania, ktoré bude teraz 21. marca. Nedeľu predpokladám, že už máte druhú väčšinu hotovú. V prípade, že nie, tak samozrejme táto hodina by vám mohla pomôcť trošku tie veci dať dokopy, možno podoplňať tú poslednú tabuľku o druhej svetovej vojne. Ja sa pokúsim prebehnúť, ja mám ešte síce útorok, vy máte štvrtok alebo piatok, ale skúsim prebehnúť tú druhú svetovú vojnu naraz. Máme samozrejme tých hodín je už pomerne málo, dokonca máme veľmi veľa tém. No a v podstate tá druhá svetová vojna, aby sme mali učiť poriadne, tak to musíme venovať, ja neviem, aj mesiac, hej, pri dvojhodinovkách. Takže bohužiaľ toto nie je možné. My sme samozrejme prešli podrobne naše dejiny, takže skúsime si spraviť prehľad a vysvetlím vám na konci, ak teda stihneme. Netuším, či to vyjde. A či v podstate akým spôsobom túto druhú svetovú vojnu treba poňať, pretože máte samozrejme milióny dokumentov, milióny videí na YouTube, máte množstvo filmov nahratých, máte obrovské množstvo kníh, hej, a množstvo ľudí má históriu dejepis rado iba, alebo číta iba kvôli tomu, že sú fascinovaní druhou svetovou vojnou. No nezabudnite, že máte teda otázky, na ktoré máte odpovedať, tak ako tradične vám samozrejme komentujem, viete sami. Takže netuším, čo sa vás ešte spýtam, ale už máte tie otázky tam, takže myslím, že môžeme ísť na to. Takže základná vec, to čo som vám hovoril, k druhej svetovej vojne máte aj wordové poznámky po slovensky. Sú to v podstate moje seminárové poznámky, ktorých som ja vychádzal. Sú to v podstate také základné, ale aby ste pochopili možno tú prezentáciu, tak by bolo dobré si ich možno prejsť, aby ste možno mali taký väčší prehľad alebo chápali, že čo tým Breznočák myslí nejakým výrazom, napríklad pojmom a tak ďalej. Takže máme tu toho dosť veľa. Takže tak samozrejme, keď idete na koniec vojny, tak máme tam dve témy, ktoré jednu sme už prešli, následky vojny budeme ešte preberať na budúce. No a je to Slovensko, v podstate počas druhej svetovej vojny, to čo sme si hovorili. No a na konci budeme dôležitú tému preberať a to je holokaust. Tu v prezentácii mám len formou samotných nejakých pojmov. Nechcel som to rozoberať príliš podrobne, pretože tiež je to téma veľká, obrovská, ale každý z vás musí poznať význam týchto všetkých slov od holokaust, Shoah, antisemitizmus, ghetto, pogrom, konečné riešenie židovskej otázky, norimberské zákony a tak ďalej a tak ďalej. A v podstate celý ten postup, pretože to sú veci, ktoré sú dôležité. No a filmov, ktoré tu máte, obrovské množstvo, je ich samozrejme oveľa viac. Ja som vám vybral zatiaľ len také najdôležitejšie, takže to je zatiaľ všetko z tejto strany. No, poďme na samotnú prezentáciu. So I am switching to English, guys, because of course this is supposed to be English lesson. Again, you cannot see the things behind me, behind this face, but still, anyhow, I will continue. Okay, so as we know officially, the war, that there had been many preparations, many conflicts before the war started itself, and once it happened, so for example, Slovakia was already ally of Germany. Even before the war, there had been some preparations, and that was maybe a big surprise for many communists, which I'm actually these days discussing with some of my friends over the Facebook. They can't understand why communists are depicted very often. Or Russians don't like it, for example. Actually, neither Poles like it, and nobody likes it when they are shown depicted as the allies of Nazi. But the thing was that after destruction of Czechoslovakia, of course, Poland was the next target for Nazi Germany, with about 10 million German population in East Prussia, that was part of Poland at the time, and the other was separated part of Germany. Actually, there was city of Danzig or Gdansk that was still independent town officially, but Germans wanted to unite it. So there was one thing that could ruin them. That would be intervention of Britain, of United Kingdom and France, which they were actually scared to do. Still, there was this appeasement. Actually, they promised to proclaim war on Germany in the case of attack to Poland, but Germans had enough information that probably these two countries would not involve more than in sending some supplies to Poland, which actually happened. The other problem was Soviet Union, because Stalin claimed during the Munich conference that they are willing to help Czechoslovakia if they ask. We didn't ask, and we didn't find and let Czechoslovakia to destroy. In this case, Hitler offered to Stalin kind of pact or agreement about not attacking each other. This pact, this agreement is known according to the names, surnames of the ministers of foreign affairs, both of Germany and Soviet Union, the Paul von Ribbentrop and Vyacheslav Molotov. So Pact Ribbentrop-Molotov, signed up on 23rd August 1939, was about that each countries are not going to attack each other. Both countries are not going to attack each other in case of any conflict, let's say about Poland. Still, this pact had a hidden secret paragraph in which they agreed upon division of Poland. So it means when Germany attacks Poland, soon Soviets may attack Poland too and just divide it. Soviets later claimed, even Stalin claimed, that this was in order to two things, 2 points. One, to create a buffer zone, či nárazníková zóna, against Germany, and the other because in eastern part of Poland, at that time Poland was shifted much more to the east than to the west, and there were many Ukrainians or Belarusians living there. Also, of course, many Jews and Poles too. But they said that these countries belong more like the Soviet Union than in here. Actually, their secret hidden intentions were revealed soon after, 2 years later, when Germans discovered, after invasion to Soviet Union, they uncovered mass graves in the forest of Katyn, during which Soviet army and NKVD killed about 17,000 Polish military officers, intelligentsia, and many other people. So it was like destruction of commanding and intellectual class of Poland. So that was actually a real thing for them, like occupation of this land and immediately destruction of bourgeoisie, as communists call it. So that's why even today Russians are not very happy to hear that at the beginning they were the same aggressors. Still, I will show you that that was not the end, because Soviets were the aggressors. What happened now when Germans were okay with this, with their ally, which, as you can see, there were many cartoons about wedding, groom and bride, Hitler and Stalin, wonder how long the honeymoon will last. And two enemies actually shared the same enemies, and actually for 2 years they became secret allies. Soviet Union was, for example, sending some resources to Germany. On that way, on the 1st September 1939, Germany provoked some conflicts. There was actually fake pretended attack on the radio in Gliwice, in Poland. That was actually German radio station, and that was attacked by German troops but in Polish uniforms, which caused that of course Germany accused Poland from attacking their own, just like in Czechoslovakia, about attacking German minority in Poland, and they just proclaimed war, pretty late, and just attacked them. The other country that attacked Poland was Slovakia. Of course, Josef Tiso, Slovak fascists, they claimed that we are just taking back the villages that Poland had taken from us during the Munich Treaty, and during the Award of Vienna, because they occupied some villages in Orava, in Spiš and Zamagore. And anyhow, Slovakia, of course, reoccupied these villages, but also they actually marched forward, and they actually got even almost to some towns here in the south, like Novi Targ, for example. And for this said, I think that Milan Ďurica or some of František Vnuk, I'm not sure which one of these pro-fascist historians claim to show that Tiso was a great man, which was not. So he created probably fake story that Hitler offered Zakopane, which is famous tourist resort beneath the Tatras. So Slovakia would have even northern slopes of high Tatras, which Tiso claimed that no, we never had these lands, that they had never been part of Slovakia, which there is no evidence about it. So you see that many historians pick up the version of history they believe or they want it to be true. so they can persuade and introduce their political or religious or philosophical opinions. But that was the third aggressor on 17 September, USSR, of course, officially claiming they are going to save Poles. But the thing was that there had been already agreement on the place on the river, on the border between Germany and Soviet Union. So actually, German army stopped at one position and they didn't march forward because they expect that these lands will belong to Soviet Union. So Soviets just occupy them. And as I said, the forest of Katyn, the Katyn massacre, prove that probably Stalin had different intentions with Poles. And of course, imagine that during the history, Poles and Russians, for 1,000 years, they had been fighting each other. There were many wars, many rebellions, many uprisings, many hostilities between these two countries and nations. Of course, Poland, when it was attacked, British and French couldn't betray their allies again for the second time. So immediately they proclaimed war on Nazi Germany, which of course Germany said, "Look at them, they are the aggressors, not us. We just came to punish Poland because they were aggressors, so we are defending ourselves." But that was all the intentions that Hitler wanted, and he had written in Mein Kampf in this book. So that's why I need to have wide perspective to understand it. What happened? As I said, they didn't help them at all. There were no assault. There were actually some naval battles, but not in order to help Poles. So they sent them on only some medical supplies, and that was all. And even when Poland was defeated, during until the spring 1940, during whole winter, there was no any military actions of France or Britain, no air force attacks, no artillery bombing, and so on. So that's why people start to call it the phony war, Chudna Vojna, because they were at war, but they were not fighting at all. So French were just lying on the, waiting. Actually, they expected that First World War, trench war, would happen again. That's why, for that reason, they had built huge concrete fortification, much bigger than our fortresses in Czechoslovakia. This was called Line of Maginot, the Maginot Line. Huge cannons, underground tunnels, and huge fortifications. They believed that Germans just could not penetrate. But they did something different, and that's Blitzkrieg, and I shall explain on the next slide. Soviets, as I said, were not the good guys at this beginning of the war, because immediately when Poland was attacked, so during the winter of 1940, Soviets invaded Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Again, their explanation was to create a buffer zone and prevent Nazi from occupying this land and use them for the assault invasion to Soviet Union, which sounds again nice. But the other thing is that also two of the states, Estonia, especially Latvia, at the time had pro-fascist government, even Lithuania. So what I told you before, that many states by 1930s were already fascist, pro-fascist, radical right, so that was the point. Actually, that was a bad thing, because Latvians, Estonians then expected Germans as their deliberators, and for a while they deliberated them. Proclaim also the Estonians definitely could be Aryan race, white people, white race, but then Soviet Union occupied them again. So these three states became part of Soviet Union until 1990 and 1991. So that's why also their historical point of view on Russians is very different, even including that Russians settled in these three countries, especially in Estonia and Latvia, in large numbers. One third of population of those countries, small countries, is Russian speaking. So they kind of try to protect themselves, and this is the other thing. But in another country was attacked, that was Finland, that was not so right oriented, I would say. There was still kind of democracy in here, despite they had good relations even with Germany, with Britain, and so on. Of course, with Sweden, that was kind of protector of Finland. But Soviet army just invaded it. This so-called Winter War, surprisingly, Finnish army defended thanks to supplies from Britain, from Sweden, from Germany, and they deployed all male population capable of fight, about 500,000 people, and of course during the winter, Finns used to their terrain, which is forest, that's for using, as you can see, cross-country skis, and very well equipped, and also with high moral. Actually, they caused such high casualties to the Red Army, which was not prepared at the time for these winter conditions. that they suffered like about 300,000, 400,000 casualties. Russians were actually very surprised for this fact, and Soviets were angry. Of course, Stalin then sent to death many of the commanders, but next time they start to create kind of supplies for winter war that actually was good for them during invasion of Germany and other states in 1941. Still, Finland officially surrendered because Soviets offered them that, okay, we are not going to occupy all Finland, but just give us Karelia. Karelia is a small region just between St. Petersburg and Ladoga Lake, and again, small region to this like corridor in here. This to the White Sea. So Finland actually gave up these territories, but they kept independence. Of course, that led them to among the pact against Comintern. So just like Slovakia, later Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, later on, even Finland became one of the allies. Good for them was that Finns didn't attack during this invasion 1941. Finns didn't attack St. Petersburg, and what they occupied was only Karelia. Slovak army, for example, country was fighting near Caucasian mountains, near Azov Sea. So that was very big difference, and that's why also Soviets didn't attack Finland again, and they claimed that if they remain neutral, they are okay with this. Finns even bought Soviet military jets during the Cold War only to show that they are like friendly towards Soviets, but they are neutral, not entering NATO, buying Soviet military jets, but they will keep capitalist democracy. So very different and very interesting. Also to provoke like neo-Nazi and racist guys, one of the main leaders of this victory, that is actually was defeat of Finns, but de jure was the defeat and de facto was victory of Finland. And this invasion actually was organized by Erich von Mannerheim, Swedish minority Finn, and to be celebrated. Many artists didn't like it, so as a provocation for many like white supremacists, so the actor of Erich von Mannerheim was picked up guy from Ethiopia or Somalia, black guy. So this was the trend when it started, and many people were angry that how can be black people in like medieval society. So sometimes it is of course like Hollywood like crazy thing, but sometimes it is artistic intention, like to provoke people, to abandon this stuff. Okay, still, as you can see, this was the beginning of the war. So this is the situation that two aggressors, Germany with the occupied lands, including Slovakia, the only country invading Poland, then Soviets invading Poland from the other side, and Britain and France before the war. What you can see, this is Polish cavalry. There are many like rumors that they didn't have tanks and they had to fight like tanks, German tanks with their cavalry, which was not actually true. German army, Wehrmacht, they had more horses in their army, more cavalrymen than Poland, and Poland had some tanks, not many. Actually, Polish army was not much stronger than Czechoslovakian army, so that was the thing. This nice cartoon, not nice, but accurate cartoon, I would say, depicts two snakes after just swallowing their right, so Germany, as you see, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, but Soviet Union with Stalin, okay, Romania, Hitler, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. So just compare them. And okay, what happened now? Of course, Germans now turned to the Western Europe and on their conquest. This was in the form, led in the terms of so-called the Blitzkrieg tactics, which was the tactics invented by German general staff and very successful for that time, modern or contemporary current machinery. The point difference between First World War and Second World War was mainly in two things. There was development in technologies, especially in tanks, in tank war, and secondly, and that was really major stuff, was Air Force. They were produced in so large numbers and with so efficiency that they could be really decisive weapons in the battlefield. For that reason, how to avoid clashing the trench lines and like complete destruction in one place, they invented the style, the Blitzkrieg, into first step, like is attack. Okay, thanks to attack, you will find where are the weakest points in the defense of your enemy, try to penetrate it, and then try to encircle it. Of course, it was much more complicated. I will show you also one blog that is nicely developing. So this is the other thing. So one main point of attack, then attackers in advance against one weak point, and they start opening and envelope the besieging of your enemy. Then for that reason, that was done mostly with a combination of Air Force, with Luftwaffe, and Wehrmacht, with the tank divisions. But then, in the end, how these divisions were being destroyed, they were bombed by dive bombing, čiže strmhlavé bombardéry, very famous Junkers 87 Stuka, Sturmkampfflugzeug, which means like a battle airplane. And they actually could destroy them, either surrender or not. So I will show you also a couple of pictures. Not all of them are actually like high quality, and that you can use them for this for the needs we need, because it's for the purpose of the game. But this is actually the second thing which I can show you. Okay, so we have some Panzer divisions, which are actually heavy machinery with tanks, with BVPs, and so on. The point was, again, like these Sturmkampfflugzeug are like dive bombing, exactly hitting the target, and of course besieging. Even before the battle or during the battle, Luftwaffe was dropping and bombing any roads and railways, dropping paratroopers in order to prevent uh, bringing supplies and reinforcements. And in this way, okay, I need the other picture. Okay, this also is another one. So weak point, just besieging them, bombing them, and throwing paratroopers behind the lines. So that was this Panzer tactics. Okay, there are many pictures, but we are not going to analyze them. What I want to show you guys is this map. Because as you see, Maginot Line with this blue line was this huge fortification. Maybe I should show you some pictures so you have idea how it looked like, because it was very different from what we know from the First World War, and what was really like incredible huge system of fortifications in here. So they were actually not only like this artillery, but there were tunnels inside, concrete bunkers that were really huge, and underground trains, so they even Germans knew that probably that would be like very difficult to attack them. But French did another one mistake. They repeated from the First World War. As you can see, French-Belgian borders were not protected so much, and they believed that Netherlands can protect some line, even Belgians, but both countries were pretty weak. Netherlands believed that they could remain neutral, but this time Germany not only they attacked Belgium, Luxembourg, but also Netherlands, and again invaded these lands. But now, thanks to this Blitzkrieg tactics, the French didn't stop them at Somme River, so German actually destroyed French army very quickly, marched to Paris, and already in April 1940 they invaded this land. As you can see, there are more countries to be invaded, not only Benelux countries and France, and then Hitler can climb up the Eiffel Tower. He had to actually climb it up, walk on the stairs, because French staff in the Eiffel Tower, they destroyed they broke the elevator, the lift, so he had to like walk by stairs. The other thing, why Denmark and Norway? The other enemy to come was, of course, United Kingdom. And how to defeat United Kingdom, and you will see this map in here, maybe I can use this map, is you need a lot of airports in order to control Britain, but this is only for southern Britain. If you want to control northern Britain and maybe their connection with, let's say, North America, you need also Norway, because from Norway, Norwegian airports, you can control even Scotland, you can attack it. And how to get to Norway if you don't want to attack neutral Sweden, because Swedes were selling iron to Germany and to all countries around. So to invade Denmark. So even Denmark, neutral Denmark, was invaded, which was again interesting, because Belgium, Dutch government, just like Czechoslovak government, went to exile to London. But King Christian IX or whoever, I can't remember, so he remained in Denmark only to show population that is not going to give up. And instead of fighting, because Danes really couldn't stand any chance. But what could Tiso do? What could he do? Was that just like the King of Denmark, he could stay there and just resist only with his civic disobedience. King of Denmark, despite of occupation, every morning he kept this everyday morning ritual, riding the horse in uniform, even when Jews were starting to be sent to death camps from Denmark. Not many, of course. So he asked his tailor to sew yellow David star, just like Jews had to wear, only to show solidarity. And even Hitler couldn't afford to like take him and kill him. He wouldn't do that even to Tisa. Karl Sidor, if you remember, was the one that he refused Hitler's ultimatum, and he didn't. So that was interesting. Then, in this case, Denmark was occupied until the land didn't have many chances to fight. But Norwegians, they did. And with the support of small British troops, they start to fight. Actually, there is legendary. Uh, some legendary fights in the mountains of Norway, but even the conquest of Oslo when one of the German Navy, Kriegsmarine, was sailing to the fjord of Oslo, the capital of Norway. So there was very old island fortress from like 16th or 17th century, from the times of 30 Years' War, and still it was operating in 19th century. Since the time, it was shooting only when the new king of Norway and when Norway became independent in 1905. And it was shooting only the like ceremonial, shootings. But suddenly, the one of these battleships was just flowing just in front of the cannons of this fortress. So the Norwegian soldiers start to shoot at it, and actually they sunk it with old cannons from like 17th century. Still, they didn't have any chance. So gradually, Germans got almost over the polar circle and were fighting even in these lands. And that was actually the end of the conquest of Krieg. That is called Blitzkrieg. So like lightning war. Of course, because France was defeated so quickly, so even British army had to move their armies from France, because British army was actually a couple of times smaller than let's even Czechoslovak army. So even for them, 100 or 200,000 soldiers was just crucial to deploy them in the world or for the defense of United Kingdom itself. And because they didn't have any chance, so new Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, famous historian, who criticized appeasement policy for all the time because he understood from history that probably Hitler wouldn't stop. That would be just their final war. So he just gave a famous speech to the radio and also with the king, who had this like speech disability, and they asked people, even civilians, to take their boats, even fishers boats and yachts, and try to like move their army from Dunkirk. That was the port where actually all these British, French, and even Czechoslovak and Polish troops, voluntary troops, were fighting for the defense of those countries, were waiting. And in this way there was this transport of the soldiers to Britain, about 500,000 of them, which was really big power and could fight further on. Since July 1940, so-called the Battle of Britain started, and that was the only possibility. If Germans wanted to embank in Britain like Spanish Armada in the 16th century, or Normans in Hastings in 11th century, they needed to destroy the power of if British Navy, which was the most powerful in the world at that time. Actually, we know that Japanese and American was better, much better at the time, still much better than German. Without U-boats, there would be nothing. But how to destroy British Navy was one, and that was thanks to Luftwaffe, thanks to German Air Force. For that reason, if Luftwaffe can operate over the Britain and destroy their harbors and ships, so they needed to break down the air force of Britain, which they believed it would be as weak as French or Polish or Czechoslovak. But Britain was probably the most efficient in production, and maybe that was actually case why they didn't help Czechoslovakia, didn't help Poland, they didn't even properly help France. The French managed to build like 20 modern airplane like fighters, Stíhačky, which Germany had about 1,000. Czechoslovakia, 2 years before that, had like already two prototypes. Poles, they had one. But British, they managed to build about a couple of hundreds of them, and that was pretty enough to defend Britain for them. Still, you have to know where are these bombing airplanes of Luftwaffe flying, so their Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane fighters can attack them. And that was at the beginning secret weapon of British Army and British Royal Air Force. That was radar. You know that the radar stations are just giving these signals, and at the time British Army had idea that airplanes are like heading to some point, and they could send these bounds or squadrons of fighters. And suddenly, Luftwaffe Hermann Goering, their leader, was surprised. He said, "Like, give me 2 weeks, and I shall destroy the power of Royal Air Force, and we can destroy their navy, and then embank with millions of German soldiers in Britain occupied." And they believed actually that Britain would join them because they also supposed the British, like the white race, Aryan race, more than Slovaks definitely. And they tried to persuade even Churchill very often. But this was the thing that education and long time democracy and pride on their colonial power of Britain, so led that the British had really high moral and refused to join. There actually had been national fascist party of Sir Oswald Mosley. If you remember Jakub Drabik having lecture at our school, he was also mentioning this, but they were not really popular so much. When they were increasing votes in elections, so while marching in the Jewish part of London in the East End, so just Jews and communists and anarchists and many other just attack them in the streets like Antifa. That is actually supposed to be the beginnings of Antifa, like in Germany in early 1930s. And this was in this like battle of Cable Street, which actually people are fighting only with cobs and cobblestones and Molotov cocktails, attack them only to show they would not accept Nazi or fascist in here, because there are many nationalities living in London, many people of many races, so that was very different from constitutional monarchy and the idea of Britain, despite there were many races, and especially not the nobility of Britain, who rather support Hitler than Czechoslovakia or France. Nevertheless, thanks to radar, thanks to airplanes, suddenly, for all these years, they were successful. So what happened? What happened? I have to finish this because probably I will mention in further slides that they were surprised. What they keep believe that gradually British will run out of the pilots, which actually happened, and not very willingly, but they eventually allowed to build like special foreign squadrons of pilots made of Czechoslovaks and Poles, but later even from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and many others. But most famous were Polish squadrons and Czechoslovak squadrons. I believe that Poles had like 7 or 8, and Czechoslovakia had 5 squadrons. So imagine the Supermarine Spitfires with English insignia, British insignia. So under the cockpit, they had also Czechoslovak triangle, or Poles had the square sign of their military jets. And this was really famous part of our history. I told you about these pilots. Even one of the most famous. Are still like heroes, and some of the battalions in Slovak modern army are named according to the pilots of these guys. Otto Smik was the most famous in here, and actually some of them actually flew to help Slovak national uprising, for example. They also established later on bombing and also night squadrons. So when just like we had the Soviet army or Czechoslovak army in Soviet Union and these British or American troops of Czechoslovaks. So in the end, after the war, Czechoslovakia had weapons of Soviet and American and British production. All still, British were fighting. So then, angry Hitler asked Goering, ordered him to move on the night bombing. So they start to attack even civilian targets, and that was the reason why British and American Air Force later on bombed even big German cities. So if somebody asks you, look at this, they comment like crime against humanity. But first remember that London, Birmingham, Manchester were being bombed with civilians, with kids. There are many stories that you know that even kids had to be removed to countryside. There are many movies about this, to be hidden. People in London were hiding in the tube in the underground of in the underground metro of London and so on. Still, they survive in this blitz. They call it like Nicht Blitz or Nachtblitz, the night lightning, and gradually building also new air force for bombing German towns. The only ally who held them at this moment of Britain was United States. Despite being neutral, they were sending a lot of oil, a lot of caoutchouc with us for rubber, for wheels, and Sweden were selling them iron. The important thing was also campaign in Mediterranean Sea, or I would generally call Middle Mediterranean and so on. Already in 1939, in April, Mussolini's fascist Italy invaded Albania. That must be your first mention in your chart. If it's not there, I know that you were not watching this lesson. Since the summer, Italians wanted also to expand from their colony from Libya to Egypt, in British Egypt, and to French Algeria. So they started this campaign. But what happened that British troops, despite being very small, again with reinforcements of Polish and Czechoslovak infantry and tanks, who are again like volunteers were fighting there, so defeated Italians near Tobruk. So again, Mussolini had to ask Hitler for help, and Hitler again he gladly sent their special troops that had been preparing for the conquest of the world, and they were called Afrika Corps, so corpses or Corps of Africa. Commanded by excellent genius commander Erwin Rommel. For his great tactical skills, he was called the Desert Fox. Here in the picture, Africa Corps in their typical desert uniforms, desert color uniforms, held them and pushed British to Egypt and even to Algeria, to Morocco. But what helped them was that USA entered the war and helped also embank in Morocco and in Algeria and push Africa Corps and Italians back to Egypt and Libya and banish them from North Africa. That lasted until 1943. So you see that whole campaign was really like a game from the Big Bang Theory that Sheldon Cooper was one day playing, and it was really for like 3 years campaign in Sahara Desert and interesting. Without Indiana Jones, of course, but with one guy that is very important for us, especially if you want to compare even Slovak fascism, and this is main general in chief of Italian armies, Pietro Badoglio. Pietro Badoglio was main commander, even the guy who supported Mussolini at the beginning, but still the head of the state was the king, Vittorio Emanuele III. And if you remember that Mussolini was given power from the king, there were no elections. So still from the point of view of Pedro Badoglio, the main chief commander was the king, just like for us is the president, Zuzana Čaputová. She's the main commander. And the military should obey her, not prime minister. And that's why what happened when they were defeated, and Americans later and British embanked in the Sicily and in the southern Italy, and there's marching to the north. So Pietro Badoglio was given order from the king to imprison. To capture Benito Mussolini, what was done, and Italy changed sides already in 1943, 1 year before Slovak national uprising. So now tell me, when the founder of fascism is being captured by local authorities, why Josef Tiso couldn't join Ferdinand Čatlož and Zaťko and Karvaš in order to join Slovak national uprising? He didn't, because he didn't want to, because we were real fascists. So in this way, that was the other thing. What led the other thing was another Italian ambitions, and from Albania that had been already occupied since 1939. So Italian army invaded Greece. But here in mountainous terrain of mountains of Epirus, Italian tanks were not very efficient, and Greek army deployed much dangerous or much efficient weapon or means of transportation for their army and their cannons, and they were donkeys. Greek army actually really deployed donkeys who were carrying machine guns and mine throwers and cannons to the tops of the mountains from which they start shoot Italians, and actually Italians start to run. So Greek army counter-attack them, counter-offensive znamená protiofenziva, and they push Italian army to half of Albania. And there was danger that Italian would suffer another terrible, shameful defeat. So again, Hitler sent Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe to help Italians, their ally. Of course, arrival invasion of Germans from Bulgaria and from Italy caused that the Greek army had to withdraw despite it had some small troops of British troops and especially of the Anzac, which were volunteers from Australia and New Zealand. Remember those guys, clever guys who suffered defeat in Gallipoli in the First World? That's where these. So the Anzac, Australia, New Zealand, these army corpses try to help them. So later Yugoslavia. Okay, I just realized that probably my time is quickly running out of, so I got only 20 minutes, guys. So I really had to maybe tell you more a different lesson of if you are interested, maybe just watch some lessons given to graduates. So what I wanted to tell you guys that Greece was very quickly destroyed despite Hitler adored Greeks. He supposed them to be white race. He also ordered that they can that their officers, commanders, can keep their handguns. But most Greeks were actually either communists or anarchists, and those were fighting immediately start to shoot at them. So Greeks were among the countries that were weaker than Czechoslovakia, just like Norway, and they were fighting because they valued what can we support, Nazism or anything on that, and they prefer that. Of course this is different mentality, but what about Norway? This is different. This is what happened, that even in the Crete island of Crete, Greeks were heroically defending against invasion. That was really interesting battle. Somewhere watch it, I really recommend you to go. The last country remaining here still independent was Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a kingdom with quite authoritarian tendencies of the King Alexander II Karađorđević. And remember that once our allies, but this time no, but still their biggest enemies were Hungarians, but also Bulgarians and Italians and Austrians. Don't need to mention. And that's why when Alexander saw that probably they are going to be besieged by all these fascist countries, so sooner or later they would be attacked. So he decided to join this fascist alliance, pact against Comintern, the Axis powers, and he wanted to do coup d'etat, but large part of the government refused it. People just went out to the streets in Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia, and they just pulled down the king and proclaimed republic. And they knew that in a couple of hours there will be huge invasion of this fascist coalition to Yugoslavia. So to keep their high moral, the respect, and maybe some self-confidence, they knew they are going to die all. So they proclaimed war on the Axis power. Despite not having chance, also having donkeys instead of tanks in their armies, they start to fight. Of course, within 2 weeks, they were destroyed by Italian, Hungarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, and German invasion. But most of the population of the country, most of the public had been already prepared to fight fiercely. So during the occupation, they knew they couldn't kill 20 million people. They couldn't imagine at that time. But most of the fighters and of the men, and even a lot of women, went to the mountains of Dinar, from Slovenia, there are high mountains, through Bosnia Herzegovina, Croatia, and down across Serbia to Montenegro and Macedonia. They created a huge partisan movement. Actually, they divided even between communist partisans, democratic partisans, nationalistic partisans called Chetniks, and many others. Among them, the most powerful, these communists who gradually started to fight each other and seized support even from the West. And their leader, Josip Broz Tito, despite being a communist, he actually refused many of the Stalinist methods and became very popular. And what happened that at the end of the war, when Red Army from Soviet Union crossed the border from Bulgaria to Yugoslavia, they actually met with great welcome, but already most of the villages and towns had been already deliberated by their own Yugoslavian partisan troops. And that was very important because now this time Soviet, Russian secret agents couldn't capture their enemies and send them to gulags, and they couldn't establish their own Stalinist Moscow type Soviet communist party system. And Titoism was another version of socialism. They made Yugoslavia a very different socialist country from Soviet Union or Czechoslovakia or the others after the war. Still heroic resistance. So again, you can compare it to the others. What they did was that in many countries they deployed local fascists, local Nazis, local totalitarian or Christian or whatever guys who were called collaborants from our point of view, and they tried to pretend that the Germans came to save them. That happened in France, where they deployed Marshal Pétain, who ruled in southern France in the government in the town of Vichy. We call the Vichyst France. And this famous general had actually France that was even persecuting Jews. In Norway, there were Vikund Quisling. That's why in the West they are called the Quislings. The same was in Ses Inquar in Netherlands. The same in Belgium. It was the same here in Slovakia with Tiso and Tuka regime. Then there was also uh, uh, and of course, in these lands, they deploy this. In here in Croatia, they created their independent state with much bigger borders with all Bosnia, where the main leading fascist party, Ustasha, was very similar to our Hlinka's guards. And they also, just like Slovaks, they also built their own concentration camp in Jasenovac, where they were killing Jews, Serbs, Gypsies, that's Romas, Slovenes, anti-fascists, anybody, even kids were being killed there. So that was very different from like Finnish, for example, government, or Bulgarian. They refused to send Jews to that, even Mussolini. So you see that it was really various. Eventually, and I cannot say a lot about this because of running out of time. Maybe next lesson you can ask me more, or ask me about some things to tell you more again. But the point was that Soviet Union, despite of their like alliance, still as a Bolshevik communist country, was main enemy for Nazi. Also, there are many Jews living in Soviet Union. So for that reason, when, as you see, at that moment, Britain was under attacks, whole Europe, apart from their allies or neutral countries, was occupied. Look at this. Sweden, as a neutral, was not attacked. Switzerland, this is a nice story. You may remember that even Hitler wanted to conquer Switzerland because it is multicultural country. So for him, and democracy. So for him, it was like we have to kill them, destroy them. But German commander staff could not find a way how to defeat Swiss army in their mountains with all the population, male population with machine guns and with rifles, and they didn't know how to take them in the Alps. Southern France as their ally, forest ally. Spain and Portugal were just after the Civil War, so they're fascist. Ireland independent but neutral in this way, and Britain actually promised them full independence again, and support if they don't support Germany. Iceland not to be occupied by Germany, so it was occupied, annexed by United Kingdom. That was actually very funny because British sent only one ship, one battleship with very young soldiers who didn't have any experience, and when they embanked in Reykjavik, they looked really young and funny. So some of the old Icelandics, so some of they start to mock them and tackle them, and some of them just took their guns and took the bullets out, and they're just making fun of them. But the thing is that Iceland does was kind of unsinkable aircraft carrier, nepotopitelné lietadlo in all the northern Atlantic. They could control it, so that was really strategically inevitable. When all Europe was either occupied or under the rule of Nazi Hitler, that was time to attack Soviet Union. For that reason, they organized all pact against Comintern, so 12 countries of this alliance, including Slovakia, with many volunteers from various countries, including French or Belgians, uh, attacked Soviet Union according to Plan Barbarossa, name of Friedrich Barbarossa. You remember this famous German emperor from Middle Ages, on the 22nd June 1941, without proclamation of war. So Axis armies invaded these lands. They moved in couple of directions. You cannot see because of my head. Very soon they conquered Minsk, Kiev, where about 500,000 Soviet soldiers surrendered. Some of the armies went to deliberate Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and attacked St. Petersburg. Because Finns didn't attack them so hard, thanks to Ladoga Lake and access to the Baltic Sea, Soviets in St. Petersburg, despite being besieged, had still access and chance to fight. For all the war, St. Petersburg was besieged but was never conquered. People were starving there, they were eating dead bodies, but still St. Petersburg Philharmonic was giving concerts for free for people to keep the moral, because this town for 900 days was besieged and under the bombing. By the December 1941, German armies marched almost to Moscow. They were about like 30 kilometers from Moscow when the winter came. For that moment, Nazi army stopped their forward, and even Soviet army managed to stop them. And during the winter, it was just like couple of battles, but not decisive ones. Okay, so in this way, that was first phase of the war in Soviet Union. What happened in remaining countries? In remaining countries, Germans deployed for the first time at war special battle groups of SS Schutzstaffel that were for the destruction of resistance, but also in order to terrorize the civilians. The other thing was that because Soviet Union was Slavic, mostly Slavic country, according to the National Socialism doctrines of Hitler, a white Aryan race, if you remember, among the Jews and Gypsies, even Slavic people were those ones who should have been killed, annihilated. For that reason, they organized, actually very famous, infamous for us, Reinhard Heydrich established special battle groups called Einsatzgruppe. Einsatzgruppe were special troops recruited from the villains, criminals, murderers, rapists who were offered to serve in the military instead of like sitting in a prison or being killed as a death penalty, in order to cleanse any partisan movement, any resistant movement. At the same time, of course, it was only pretense to kill, burn all the villages in Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Russia. Well, it is a paradox that in Ukraine, because they actually first they welcome Nazi Germany and Slovaks and the others as the liberators. Soon they realize it is different. So some of the groups they firstly joined German armies like Ukrainian, how it is called, insurrectional army, Ukrajinská povstalecká armáda UPA of Stepan Bandera, firstly joined them, but they start to fight against them, but against Nazi and Soviets both. So even after the war, they were depicted by both sides as evil guys. Still, they were anti-Semitic, so we cannot praise them as good guys. So in this way, these Einsatzgruppe and Germans start to cause plundering and atrocities, cruelties on civilians. This war really changed in something we call the total war. You move everything to destroy your enemy in complete way, in ultimate way, including civilians. That was very different. Even what happened that one battalion was moved from Eastern Front as a having rest to France. But in France, they started, local French started partisan movement. So what did the commander do? That he gathered all the male of this French town and he killed them in the square. And everybody was shocked, and suddenly huge uprising was almost to happen in France because of this event. So they had to be deployed to some other place because they couldn't let the same war against white Romanized Romans or Anglo-Saxon or Celtic people, because they were not their enemies. They were the white race. Slavs were not. For that reason, for Russians, for Ukrainians, for Soviets, this was great deliberation war and the greatest like heroic war campaign. During the spring, between spring and winter 1942, Hitler ordered his commander staff, and they agreed to start attack to the south towards Azerbaijan, because around Caspian Sea, there were the biggest oil fields around Azerbaijan and Stalingrad, Volgograd today, Tsaritsyn before. They needed enough oil because they're running out of it. The other thing was that Americans entered the war, and once they invaded Italy, so their bombing airplanes could hit oil fields in Romania. So to stop them, in order to prevent them, they needed to claim these lands near Stalingrad. And when they got to Volga River, the most terrible, the biggest, the grandest battle of history started. What happened? That also warfare in the seas was there. There was submarine war in the Atlantic from the beginning. You can actually match many of the battles about sinking German ships or British ships by German U-boats. British and Japanese started to fight in Southeast Asia. Singapore was conquered. Thailand was invaded. Burma was invaded, even part of India. So again, check out the map and you will see that even Indonesia, Malaysia, even Japanese Air Force was bombing Darwin, most northern town of Australia. So of course Australians have been fighting. Indians were fighting in here, and with British they tried to stop them. Well, Japanese knew that they would have to destroy and challenge American Navy in order to to keep Pacific free of the rule of Americans, and so they could invade further on in China when there was terrible war with millions of dead people, and Japanese army caused so terrible atrocities that the numbers of that was actually as high as in the Eastern Front in Soviet Union. Without proclamation of war, they actually successfully but not efficiently bombed Pearl Harbor, that was a Marine and Air Force basement basement station in Hawaii Islands, and USA entered the war on the against Japan and against Germany. You know that actually USA started to fight Japan, but Germany, as good allies of the Axis powers, proclaimed war on USA. And now for that moment, our Nazi leader Wojciech Tuka, he wanted to be better ally for Germany than Hungarians, than Magyars, and that's why he proclaimed, without the signature of President Joseph Tiso, proclaimed war. He signed up the proclamation of war on USA. They didn't even accept it because it was not signed by the president. So, and actually, even newspapers of the time, despite being fascist, they mocking that, are we going to fight like challenge Japanese with what? With Plotnici from Dunajec and Poprad? Like they will like flow down to Mediterranean Sea, Atlantic, and maybe in 3 years we'll challenge them. So that was kind of like funny, but showing like how terrible was this collaboration. Americans were lucky because in the Pearl Harbor they had no aircraft carriers, letadlové lode, and they saved them, spared them for the other battles, especially in a decisive battle at Midway, in which this battle of aircraft carriers was only thanks to good luck, victorious for the Americans, and they could overrule this Midway and Guam and embank in the islands of Indonesia, Philippines, and even attacking some Japanese islands in the south. Japanese, as a great heroic fighters, rather commit harakiri than surrender, caused such terrible casualties to American armies. They had to shoot a couple of movies. That my favorite is Thin Red Line. Watch it out. And even fighting for Iwo Jima, this called erecting flag, American flag on the code in Iwo Jima was really famous, and there were like casualties of about 70,000 American soldiers. So among these guys, there was actually one Slovak, this one, Michal Stank, who could still speak Slovak. His parents moved from Eastern Slovakia, and they, when they had chance and finally had construction of a bomb, they rather used it to spare lives of their own people. These fierce fights for the island south of Japan continued by the 1945. Again, I have to check the time if I can manage to end it up. Okay, 4 minutes. So very quickly, guys, only for you. The breakpoint of 1941, 443 in Europe was the Germans were defeated in Africa, Allies embanked in Italy, which was the fall of Mussolini. Pietro Badoglio pulled him down, but he was rescued by Germans. And at the end of the war, he tried to escape from northern Italy, that occupied by Germans, to Switzerland, but he was captured by Italian partisans who brought him to Milan, and his body and his mistress were desecrated and lynched. And this is why Hitler committed suicide, because he didn't want to end up like him. Royal Air Force and US Air Force turned from defense to bombing German cities and destroying their economy and population. Soviets finally won in Stalingrad in terrible battle. Just watch this German movie, Stalingrad. And again, in Kursk, thanks to spies, excellent spy who found the plans about Kursk counteroffensive, so he could get in the biggest, grandest tank battle of the history. And later on, fast advance of Red Army, especially after the liberation of Kiev, which was already in 1943, divided this first and second Ukrainian front that you remember, due to Berlin across Poland, and in the south across like Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Hungary, even to Slovakia and Czechoslovakia further on. In the West, only like pretty late, but 6 June 1944, British, American, Australian, Anzac, Canadian forces embanked in so-called D-Day in Normandy and opened the second front. Very quickly by the end of 1944, even France was deliberated thanks to also their own La France Libre movement of Charles de Gaulle. and even including French army, they started advancing also into Germany. Soviets advance encourage uprising in satellite states, Romania, Transylvania, Warsaw uprising, but Stalin didn't help them, let them die because these were Poles for them, so he needed Polish communists loyal to them. But he did support Slovak national uprising. Bulgaria, Yugoslavian partisans, of course, helped them enough. When Soviets reached Budapest, Bratislava, Vienna, finally in April 1945, even Berlin, so Hitler committed suicide on 30 April, and Admiral Karl von Dönitz started to negotiate with allies, as they were called since the signature of the Atlantic Charter and the Tehran Conference and Cairo Conference. It is good to write them down in the chart too. So American and Soviets met on the Elbe River, but both of these famous photos are actually like not fake, but they were like scenes because they didn't met in this way. It was much more complicated. Germany had to surrender on the 8th May 1945 because it was midnight in Moscow at the time, and still they were fighting in Prague during Prague uprising. So Karl von Dönitz had to sign up a surrender act again on 9th May 1945. Okay, probably I do not have any time. Yeah, I got 40 seconds, so that would be really fast. Now at that moment, when Germany was defeated, now Soviet Union proclaimed war on Japan and invaded with a huge army Manchuria, that was their puppet Japanese state in China, supported of course communists in China, in Korea, in Vietnam, and actually allowed Chinese communists to win their civil war in the end. But Japanese fought fiercely, as I said, so USA used A-bombs because it was also high risk that Red Army can march even to Japan. So that's why on 6 August 1945, there were bombs dropped in Hiroshima. 9 August again, Nagasaki. Both towns were just like not the main target, but about the other towns, I think Tokyo, Kyoto, there was like a lot of clouds, so they couldn't use it. So still for Japanese, even A-bombs with this ultimate destruction was not enough, and it took them 3 weeks when Japanese Emperor Hirohito decided to surrender. Well, and Japan completely changed from pure racist country to one of the most open countries of the world and one of the most peaceful. Actually, the tragedy of Fukushima was the other one. Okay, there are a couple of videos, a lot of pictures that I'm sorry I don't have time to explain it, to show you. Maybe next lesson. German soldiers watching in the cinema pictures from movies from scenes from concentration camps, and some may be interesting. This Hiroshima School. Why We Fought is the name of one before last episode of one of the best TV series ever shot, The Band of Brothers, about 101st Airborne Division of U.S. Army, which they discovered one of the concentration camps in Bavaria. What you need to know, guys, are all these words in here. So when you have this thing, I didn't give you any task about this, but be sure you understand them, you know them. And this picture from Slovakia is the first transport of Slovak Jewish girls between age 12 and 17, girls younger than you, who were like the Jews responsible for the fall of Aryan white race. Maybe next lesson I will show you also how to study it all, because there are plenty of things about maps and maybe some visuals and some videos, but there are plenty of things, so just keep on watching it and remember that when you don't care about politics, it doesn't mean that politics wouldn't care of you. Okay, so results of the war are in the end for the next lesson, guys. And from me, that's all. Don't forget to send me your assignment, and we'll move on the Cold War next lesson. So that will be end for me. And also, so thanks for attention. Stay negative in test and positive in mind. Bye bye.